All right, episode 5 of Story Time. I have a ton of these stories from my time working as a bookie. I've shared a lot of them inside the Discord community I run. This story here is about a time when things got a little out of control attempting to collect from a bettor who couldn't pay what he lost. Now, for any of this to make any sense, I first need to provide some context. Now, when I was a bookie, you had to go and meet up to pay or collect from the bettor. This was way before Venmo and Cash App, which is now how a majority of bookies settle up. Bookies today don't realize how easy they have it. Have you ever thought about being a bookie? Right now is a pretty good time for it, and I can help answer any questions you have about getting started. I've recently helped a few people start their own sportsbook operation. Some of them didn't even really know much about sports betting either. It's easier than you think. Now, if interested, just DM me. I'll explain how it all works. You can DM me through the links in my bio that have all my social media platforms, or you can join the Discord community for free and we can talk in there. All right, now, as a bookie, the primary responsibility is collecting money from bettors that lose and paying the bettors who win. This is done weekly on Settle Up Day, which is typically Mondays. For anyone that's unfamiliar with betting with a bookie, you don't deposit money to start betting. You bet on credit. And at the end of the week, whatever your balance is, you settle up. So technically, I mean, a bettor who doesn't have a single dollar on them can place bets through a bookie. It's the bookie's job to make sure bettors can't lose more than they can afford to pay. And you do this by setting different available credit limits for bettors. You don't want someone who delivers pizzas for a living the ability to even lose $5,000 in a single week. I mean, unless he's delivering pizzas as a front for his drug trafficking operation. But the point is here, as a bookie, it does you no good if the players lose but they can't pay. You always want to have an idea of your customer's financial situation, and a lot of times this just comes by trial and error. All right, now, so every Christmas Eve, my uncle has a family party. While watching football, a guy came up to me and started talking to me about betting. Now, I'm not going to use any real names in this stories like I've done in the previous episodes of Storytime. You know, even though my videos get like 10 views, you never know who's watching. People who know me will know the people involved in the stories, even when using these fake names. But at the party, Ralph was sweating this game out on TV. I knew Ralph from family parties. His son Jay was married to my cousin, and Jay and I knew a lot of the same people. But this was basically Ralph and I's first conversation together. It was no secret I was a bookie, and this conversation was basically leading up to Ralph looking for an account to bet on. I asked Ralph the normal questions a bookie should ask when signing up a new player. How much do you bet per game? He responded with only about 500 per game. I had a fairly big sports book at this time as far as like amount of customers go, but 500 per game was more than anyone I had betting with me at the time. Um, all my players bet in the range of maybe say 25 on the low end to 200 on the high side, but only a few would bet 200. Now, as a bookie, you don't want one single player that bets way bigger than all the other players because this can lopside your sheet, meaning, your weeks will just be heavily decided by how good or bad that one big bettor does. But greed is, a powerful thing. I'm not thinking of him winning 500 per game. I'm thinking more about him losing 550 per game. So a couple days later, I get Ralph all set up with an account. His max allowed bet is 500 per game. His weekly available credit limit is 5,000. I give him his login info, username, and password. And he wasted no time firing in bets. The name of the website I was using at the time was called Big Boy Wagers. I remember the site name because it was the first website I had. Prior to using a website, I took bets over the phone and used a pen and paper to track all the bets and figures. But you still had to meet up in person to collect and pay. No personal information or card info is put on these websites. The bets are just made strictly with available credit. Now, first few weeks, Ralph and I it was uneventful basically. We just never had to meet up the first month of him betting because his end week balances was always small enough to just carry over to the next week. Like if he lost 50 one week, we weren't going to meet up to settle up for 50. We just carried it over to the next week. Now, my first uncomfortable interaction with Ralph was when he won 2,800. He was calling to collect before I was even awake on Monday. No big deal. I thought I just chalked it up to him being older. He's probably up at 5 a.m. and like 9 a.m. is like midday for him. Uh, when I met up with him to pay him, he made the 2,800 seem insignificant, like it was chump change. And I'm sticking in my head, like, why were you calling me at 7 a.m., leaving voicemail saying if you can come by or whatnot? But I paid him with a smile because as a bookie, you have to look at paying players like they're just borrowing the money for a short time and they'll give it right back. 2 or 3 weeks later, Ralph lost his entire $5,000 credit balance by Friday. Settle up day was on Monday, so we asked if he could get an increase to his available credit limit up to 7,500 so he could bet over the weekend. I said no for a few reasons, but once again, he was trying to big time me with how insignificant 5,000 was. I told him, you can pay the 5K now, and I'll reset the available credit limit back to 5K. He declined and was pretty annoyed. Come Monday on settle up day, I didn't have any 7 a.m. missed calls from him. Funny how that works, right? I never heard from Ralph that day or the next day. 5K was a lot to me too. It still is, and to anyone who says it's not, they're just bullshitting. But I'm thinking there's no way Ralph is going to stiff me. He's basically my uncle. Not technically, but through marriage, maybe, I guess. But I'm eventually going to see him at some family gathering. He can't just avoid me. I'd call Ralph several times a day, no answer. I had a trip to Las Vegas coming up for March Madness, and that 5,000 would be great to have, but still no word from Ralph, at least not yet anyway. The few days before leaving for Vegas, I was preparing my friend to be in charge of my sports book while I was gone. Although most of my clients were betting on the website, a lot of people did still call in bets. Keep in mind, this is the phone here on the screen that was the most popular phone around this time. Smartphones were just starting to come out, so it's not like everyone could bet on their phone like they can today. Plus, bettors would call to ask questions or need something adjusted or changed, so I left my work phone with my friend and was confident everything would run smooth while I was in Vegas. I left on a Thursday and came back late on Sunday night. As soon as I got home that Sunday night, I wanted to check the numbers to see how the week finished, and it was a great week. The book had won something like 7 or 8 grand. March Madness was just off to a great start. As I was going over the numbers, I noticed a player named Todd owed 4,000. I thought this had to be a mistake. First off, Todd, his bet limit at the time, available credit was like 1K, and he hardly ever bet. Even with it being March Madness, that would be like unusual for him to bet that much. And after talking to my friend who was in charge while I was gone, we confirmed that he actually did owe 4,000. And the reason he was able to lose that much is because he was betting on the website and over the phone. This was my fault for not telling my friend that you have to combine the phone action with the website action. Todd lost 1K right away on the website, and he called and asked for an increase. And my friend, who was in charge, gave him 500 more in credit, which he lost right away. But he was also calling in bets over the phone. Now, the next day was Monday, settle up day. I already knew I wasn't simply going to just call Todd, meet up with him, and him hand me 4K. But Todd was like a really nice guy. He's a little older than me. We know a ton of the same people. My best friend's older brother was actually roommates with Todd at this time. So it's not like Todd was someone I had to worry about being out of reach. When I finally talked to Todd, he said he needed a little bit more time, which I expected. What I didn't expect was him to just keep saying this 2 weeks later. At this point, I'm telling him, look, if you don't have the 4,000 or you can't come up with it, what about half? Or let's start some sort of payment plan of weekly payments. He agreed to pay 500 every Friday for 2 months. I want to say he made one payment. Can't really remember, but it's now almost 2 months has passed since he originally lost. When I would call him, he'd very rarely pick up, and when he did, he'd give me some story. I remember thinking to myself, I got to do something about this. Ralph stiffed me 5K. Now Todd um, is on the hook for 4K. There were some other small debts building up to at one point. I think I had roughly like 15,000 on the streets owed to me, and I kept thinking it was because word was spreading that nothing will happen if you don't pay Lefty. Um, this is what I was thinking in my head, and it was like consuming my thoughts and eating me up. Now, one spring day, my mother was having a yard sale at her house, which was located right on Main Street in the city I live in, basically the busiest street. This guy, Joe, was walking by and stopped. He was my older brother's friend who I haven't seen in a while. So I went inside, told my brother Joe was outside. He went outside. They hugged like long lost pals. Joe had just gotten out of prison. They began catching up. He turned to me and said, "What have you been up to lately?" And before I could even respond, my older brother said, "He thinks he's Jimmy the Greek," which I guess is a reference to some old time Vegas or famous like Las Vegas bookie or something. Joe said if I ever needed help collecting, let him know, and he like flexed. It was kind of like just a joke, I guess. So that's how I kind of took it at the time. Now, a couple days later, something triggered me to put this in motion. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of hearing Todd going on vacation, or he hit like a scratch ticket, maybe. Or maybe it was something as simple as like I was hearing he was like buying a bunch of drinks at the bar. But whatever it was, it fired me up. And I got Joe's number from my brother and called him. When Joe said that about collecting, I wasn't even sure if he was serious, but I knew right away he was absolutely serious. He was actually excited about it, especially when I told him who it was. And he knew Todd like was no threat at all. And he thought it would just be easy. The arrangement was Joe could keep half the money Todd owed, or whatever he was able to collect from Todd was half was his. So Joe was motivated. He needed money, just getting out of prison. I gave Joe all the info I had on Todd, phone number, where he lived, worked, and what kind of car he drove. Joe found him easily a couple days later and told Todd that, you owe me now, not Lefty. Uh, Joe said he'll be back in a couple days to pick up the money. While Joe is on the phone telling me that he just talked to Todd, I'm getting another call and it's Todd. He was scared and telling me, "Dude, I'm going to pay you. Why'd you get Joe involved?" He was threatening me. Todd was all types of panicked here and kept saying he's going to pay me. I told him, that time has passed. Joe bought the debt and now you have to deal with him. Todd did his best to avoid Joe, but what happened next is what I found out through what Todd had told people and then what Joe told me himself. One night, Todd got into his car. Joe was in the back seat already. Joe hit him a few times, and Todd was crying, but no matter what Joe did or threatened to do to Todd, Todd simply just didn't have the money. Joe wanted his car and the title for payment, which he got, but he called me while they were still in the car together and told me to come there to Todd's house. Now, I can't confirm if this is true, but Todd himself told people Joe held a screwdriver to his neck while they waited for me to show up. Joe was in prison for stabbing a mechanic with none other than a screwdriver. He was gaining a reputation for the screwdriver being his favorite tool. Now, when I showed up to Todd's house, him and Joe were standing outside. Joe had the car title in his hand and told me, "Todd has something to tell you." What he began telling me was that the bets he made weren't actually his and that he was placing them for someone else. At first, I didn't even care. He could have told me God himself made the bets. It makes no difference. Todd is still responsible for the bets made on his account. I asked him, well, who made the bets then? Can anyone guess here who he said? If you can guess who he said, write it in the comments now, and I'm going to be back for part 2. Little cliffhanger here. Anyone who guesses correctly, I'll shout them out in part 2's video. Hope you guys find some of this type of content interesting. Let me know with a like or a thumbs up if you do. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell as well so you can be alerted when I post part 2. Thanks for watching. Until next time, good luck with your bets.